Do you know the most beautiful sound in the world? It is not the furious screaming inside a glass boardroom. It is the dead silence of a billion-dollar empire realizing they just locked themselves inside a burning house, while I stand outside, slipping the only key into my pocket. When the chief technology officer threw me out, he never realized he pulled the pin on a grenade I planted 5 years ago. This is a perfect execution. Hello and welcome to our wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. We sincerely appreciate your ongoing support. But unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to continue operating. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can experience even more incredible, exclusive true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or comments section of this video. Now, let us dive into today's tale, and my name is Haley James. The grand ballroom of the most extravagant luxury hotel in Seattle smelled like a nauseating mixture of expensive cologne, freshly pressed suits, and desperate ambition. It was the dress rehearsal for the Ethelgard Dynamics initial public offering gala. Ethelgard was ostensibly a medical device startup, though if you looked at the flashing strobe lights, the imported smoke machines, and the booming bass echoing off the crystal chandeliers, you would think we were launching a new cryptocurrency or a hyped energy drink. The centerpiece of this entire circus, resting under a dramatic, theatrical spotlight, was my creation. It was a neurosurgery robotic arm, a sleek marvel of surgical-grade titanium and carbon fiber designed to assist neurosurgeons in the most delicate, life-saving operations known to modern medicine. I was the lead core design engineer. For 3 grueling years, I breathed life into that machine. I spent countless sleepless nights in a windowless laboratory, fueled by cheap coffee and pure obsession, perfecting the complex haptic feedback protocols that made the robot's mechanical touch as sensitive and precise as a human hand. But in the modern American technology sector, actually building the revolutionary product simply makes you a laborer. The real corporate gods are the ones who know how to package and sell it. Enter Julian Vance, our chief technology officer. Julian was a man who dressed less like a brilliant engineer and more like a pop star embarking on a global press tour. He wore a ridiculously tight black mock turtleneck, designer ripped jeans that cost more than a reliable used car, and bright white sneakers that had never touched a single drop of Seattle rain. He possessed the technical knowledge of a grapefruit. He could not write a script to save his own life, but he had a charismatic voice and a charming smile that could convince venture capitalists to empty their wallets without a second thought. Right in the middle of a complex lighting transition, Julian clapped his hands loudly. He grabbed a gold-plated microphone and paced across the stage like an arrogant self-help guru. He ordered the production crew to cut the background music and put up the inventor tribute slide. The massive LED screen behind him flickered, transitioning to a gorgeous, high-definition graphic detailing the core patents and the final Food and Drug Administration submission documents. I stood by the soundboard in the back of the room, sipping a lukewarm coffee, waiting to see my name up in lights. Instead, the screen displayed a massive, professionally retouched photo of Julian, and right below him, the name Marcus. Marcus was a newly hired shadow director. He did not know how to compile a basic line of code, nor did he know the difference between a neural network and a local area network. But he had a phenomenal golf handicap and spent every single weekend drinking overpriced scotch at the country club with Julian. My name, the name of the woman who wrote 100% of the core architecture, had been completely erased from every single legal document projected on that massive screen. The ballroom instantly fell into a suffocating, heavy hush. Hundreds of employees turned their heads toward me, their eyes wide with shock. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee cup. I calmly walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor, until I stood directly below the edge of the stage. I looked straight up at Julian and politely asked, "Julian, Would you care to explain why my name has been removed from the core patents and regulatory submissions? Julian did not even have the decency to lower his microphone. He scoffed, the arrogant sound echoing out of 20 massive speakers and vibrating against the walls. He looked down at me with a pitying, deeply artificial smile. Haley, you are an old cog in a brand new, highly optimized machine, he declared, his voice booming over the public address system. Your technical mindset is rigid, fundamentally outdated, and simply incompatible with the billion-dollar vision of Ethelgard Dynamics. I shifted my cold gaze to the front row of the audience, where the board of directors sat in their tailored Italian suits. These were the men and women who truly controlled the money and the power. They stared at their expensive smartphones. They inspected their manicured fingernails. They completely averted their eyes. To them, I was just a disposable asset on a spreadsheet. They only cared about the profit margins, the projected stock price, and the media hype. They silently agreed to squeeze every drop of intellectual value out of my brain and throw away the empty shell, eagerly making room for smooth talkers who possessed the right connections and the right pedigree. Julian paced back and forth on the stage, soaking in the oppressive silence of the room. Then, he delivered the final, calculated blow. He announced my immediate termination. Citing a sudden corporate restructuring initiative, he fired me through a microphone in front of my entire team. He coldly informed me that because I was being dismissed for failing to align with the new corporate culture, there would be absolutely no severance package. Furthermore, because we were exactly 1 week away from my 4-year stock vesting cliff, my equity was completely forfeited. Everything I had worked for was legally stripped away in a matter of seconds. 2 massive security guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows of the stage. Explicitly instructed by Julian to escort me to my desk to pack my personal belongings and leave the premises immediately, the audience of my peers watched in absolute terror and profound pity. They knew that if the undisputed genius behind the core product could be slaughtered so publicly and so ruthlessly, absolutely none of them were safe. I stood there for a long, agonizing moment. I did not shed a single tear. I did not beg for my job or my shares. I did not shout threats of future lawsuits. I just looked at Julian, at his perfect hair and his smug, triumphant smile, and a slow, quiet smirk spread across my face. I turned around and walked back to the makeshift engineering booth. Under the intense, watchful eyes of the security guards, I did not touch a single company laptop, notebook, or proprietary document. I simply reached into my leather tote bag, pulled out one small, dusty personal hard drive containing my favorite classical music playlists, and slipped it deep into my coat pocket. When I looked up at the guard standing closest to me, my eyes were so dead, so unnervingly calm, that he visibly swallowed hard and instinctively took a half step back. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He did not know it, and Julian certainly did not know it. But I was not walking away empty-handed. I was leaving them with a ticking time bomb, and the countdown to their absolute destruction had just begun. The drive back to my quiet apartment in the suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. The silence inside my car was a stark contrast to the booming bass and the chaotic artificial fog of the hotel ballroom. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt, letting the cold Seattle rain wash over the windshield. Every single mile that distanced me from the chief technology officer and that boardroom full of vultures felt like shedding a heavy, suffocated skin. When I finally walked through my front door, I did not collapse onto the sofa. I did not pour my heart out to a friend on the phone. My heart rate was a steady, calm 60 beats per minute. I walked straight past the kitchen and into my small, dimly lit study. Hanging on the far wall was a cheap, framed abstract painting I had bought years ago. I pulled the frame to the side, revealing a heavy steel combination safe embedded deep within the drywall. I spun the dial. 3 quick turns to the right, 2 to the left, 1 more to the right. The heavy iron door clicked open with a satisfying metallic thud. Inside, resting next to my passport and a small stack of emergency cash, was a thick manila folder. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges and coated in a thin layer of dust. I pulled it out and traced my fingers over the bold black letters printed across the top. It read, Obsidian Nexus Limited Liability Company. It was a completely anonymous shell corporation based out of Wyoming. I had established it over a decade ago when I was just a paranoid college student who wanted to protect my early software projects from being stolen by university professors. For years, that company had sat dormant in the dark, an empty ghost ship waiting for a captain. But today, it was about to become the most dangerous entity in the medical technology industry. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap I had just laid, we have to rewind the clock exactly 5 years ago, long before I ever had a fancy desk at Ethelgard Dynamics, long before Julian ever wore his first pair of designer sneakers. I was just a hungry independent contractor working out of a damp garage. During those solitary months, I wrote a highly specialized algorithm. It was a micro-surgical haptic feedback protocol. In simple terms, when a surgeon uses a robotic arm to cut into delicate brain tissue, they cannot physically feel the resistance of a blood vessel or the density of a tumor. My algorithm translated visual data and mechanical microvibrations into physical sensations sent directly to the surgeon's fingertips. It was the absolute soul of the robot. Without my code, their billion-dollar machine was nothing but a blind, numb piece of useless metal. Ethelgard desperately needed my protocol. They begged me to join their team to integrate it. But here is where their towering arrogance became their fatal flaw. When the Human Resources Department and the elite corporate legal team transitioned me from an independent contractor to a full-time employee, they were lazy. They were profoundly, criminally lazy. Instead of drafting a custom employment contract that meticulously addressed my prior inventions, some overpaid corporate lawyer simply downloaded a cheap, standard boilerplate non-disclosure and employment agreement. They forced me to sign away all intellectual property I created during my employment, but they completely forgot to include a prior invention assignment clause. They never legally secured the permanent rights to the foundational code I wrote before I became their official employee. I sat down at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room with a harsh, bluish glow. I navigated to the official National Patent Portal and logged into the secured database. I typed in the search query for the haptic feedback algorithm. The results loaded instantly. 9 core patents appeared on the screen. I scrolled down to the ownership section, and a cold, genuine smile finally broke across my face. The registered owner for all 9 core patents was not Ethelgard Dynamics. The registered owner was Obsidian Nexus Limited Liability Company. Ethelgard had never owned the soul of their own machine. They only held a temporary provisional licensing agreement that allowed them to use the code during the research and development phase. I leaned closer to the monitor and checked the expiration date of that provisional license. It had officially expired exactly 3 months ago. For the past 90 days, every single investor demonstration, every single promotional video, and every single regulatory submission the company had flaunted was built on stolen, unlicensed property. A normal person in my position would have immediately called a cutthroat litigation lawyer. A normal person would have filed a massive lawsuit the very next morning, demanding millions of dollars in back pay and compensation. But lawsuits are incredibly predictable. They drag on for 5 to 10 years in dusty courtrooms. The lawyers take half the money, and the corporate executives usually escape with their golden parachutes intact. I did not want a settlement check. I wanted absolute ruin. I decided to play a much crueler, much quieter game. I would say absolutely nothing. I would let them keep the robot. I would let them proceed with their initial public offering. I would let them sell this copyright-infringing machine to hospitals all across the country. I wanted them to build their entire golden castle on top of my hidden sinkhole. I stood up and walked over to the small bar cart in the corner of the room. I poured myself a generous measure of aged Kentucky bourbon, the amber liquid catching the faint light from the laptop screen. I walked back to my desk, took a slow, burning sip, and began typing. I submitted the required renewal forms to the Wyoming Secretary of State. I paid the annual franchise tax fee of $50. I executed the digital signatures to awaken the corporation from its slumber. With a final decisive strike of the Enter key, the legal status of Obsidian Nexus Limited Liability Company changed from inactive to fully operational. The ghost ship was no longer empty. It had just transformed into an impenetrable intellectual property fortress, armed to the teeth and completely invisible to the radar of the fools who thought they had just ruined my life. The trap was set, and the bait had already been swallowed whole. If you want to destroy a corporation, you do not hand your weapon to their direct competitors. Rival medical technology companies are slow, bureaucratic, deeply cowardly, and terrified of corporate litigation. They would gladly spend 2 to 3 years sitting in a comfortable mediation room just to avoid a single day of bad press. I did not have 3 years to wait, and I certainly did not care about fair market competition. I wanted a ruthless predator. I needed a shark with federal backing, endless resources, and absolute legal immunity. That is exactly why I bypassed the entire healthcare sector and booked a discreet, one-way flight to Chicago to negotiate directly with Vanguard Sentinel. Vanguard was not in the business of healing the sick or saving lives. They were a towering, terrifying behemoth deeply entrenched within the military-industrial complex. They manufactured heavy artillery systems, autonomous combat drones, and highly classified bomb disposal robots for the Department of Defense. When dealing with high-yield explosives or volatile chemical weapons, the margin for mechanical error is precisely zero. Vanguard had spent the better part of a decade trying to build a robotic appendage that could successfully defuse an explosive device without triggering a hair-trigger pressure plate. However, their mechanical systems were always too rigid, too clumsy, and violently unresponsive. They entirely lacked the delicate, perceptive human touch. 48 hours after I reactivated my shell corporation, I found myself standing on the rain-slicked tarmac of a highly secured private airfield on the desolate outskirts of Chicago. The deafening roar of a massive jet engine provided the perfect auditory cover for a conversation that officially did not exist. I was swiftly escorted by armed guards into a climate-controlled aviation hangar, where a man named Elias Sterling was waiting at a stainless steel table. Elias was the director of applied intelligence for Vanguard. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal gray suit and possessed the cold, dead eyes of a man who evaluated every single human interaction purely as a tactical equation. I did not waste a single second with corporate pleasantries or warm introductions. I dropped a heavy leather-bound dossier directly onto the center of his table. "What you are looking at is the missing link in your bomb disposal initiative," I stated, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the hangar. "It is a microsurgical haptic feedback protocol. My algorithm mathematically translates mechanical resistance into hyper-realistic tactile feedback. It will seamlessly allow your military operators to physically feel the tension of a hidden tripwire or the friction of a firing pin through a remote console located 5,000 miles away, operating with strict millimeter precision." Elias slowly flipped open the dossier. He meticulously read through the architectural schematics and the rigorous performance metrics. I watched his eyes dart methodically back and forth across the pages. For a man extensively trained by intelligence agencies to conceal his emotions. The sudden, sharp clench of his jaw gave him away completely. He knew exactly what kind of weapon I had just placed in front of him. It was the ultimate holy grail of remote robotic manipulation. "This is remarkably sophisticated architecture," Elias finally murmured, tapping a manicured finger against the technical readouts. "If these latency numbers are completely accurate, this software changes our entire operational playbook on the battlefield." "What is your exact asking price for a standard licensing agreement?" "I do not want a standard licensing agreement," I replied smoothly, leaning forward and resting my hands flat on the cold metal table. "I am offering you an exclusive, permanent transfer of all commercial and defense rights. You will have absolute, unchecked, global control over the technology, and I will eagerly sell it to you for exactly 50% of its current market valuation." Elias narrowed his eyes sharply. The financial offer was staggeringly good, and powerful men like Elias did not believe in random acts of charity. Half price for an exclusive, permanent monopoly on a revolutionary protocol. What is the catch here? The catch is the poison pill clause I have explicitly embedded in the terms of service, I answered, sliding the final page of the thick contract toward his hands. You get the massive discount, but you must accept my specific legal framework. By signing this document, Vanguard officially classifies this algorithmic code as proprietary, military-grade technology under your federal defense contracts. That means any unauthorized entity found using this exact software will not merely face a standard civil copyright infringement lawsuit. They will be immediately classified as a severe threat to national defense security. They will face aggressive, merciless intervention and asset seizures from federal agencies. Elias read the clause silently, his lips slowly curving into a dark, predatory smile. He understood the brutal leverage. Vanguard would effectively hold a federally sanctioned monopoly, backed by the full, terrifying weight of the government. There is one final condition, I added, pointing a finger to a tiny, heavily bolded addendum buried at the very bottom of the page. Under absolutely no circumstances is Vanguard Sentinel ever permitted to sublicense this protocol, either directly or indirectly, to a specific medical entity known as Ethelgard Dynamics. If they approach you, you will permanently deny them. If a shadow company acting on their behalf attempts a purchase, you will reject it. That exclusion is completely non-negotiable. Elias looked up from the paper, staring intensely into my eyes. He was brilliantly putting the pieces together. He absolutely recognized the name of the medical startup that had just been heavily featured across the financial news networks for their upcoming initial public offering. He realized he was not just buying a piece of technology. He was being actively weaponized as the blunt instrument of my personal vengeance. And because it benefited his defense conglomerate immensely, he did not care in the slightest. It truly seems someone at Ethelgard made a very profound mistake, Elias noted softly, reaching inside his jacket to withdraw a heavy black fountain pen. They made several, I replied, my expression remaining completely blank. Elias unscrewed the cap and dragged the black ink across the signature line. The contract was legally finalized. The binding seal of a major defense contractor was now permanently stamped over my intellectual property. I walked out of that hangar and back out into the freezing Chicago rain, feeling the immense, heavy satisfaction of a perfectly locked mechanism. The trap had just snapped shut. From that exact second forward, the beautiful billion-dollar surgical robots that Julian and his arrogant board of directors were currently parading in front of Wall Street investors were no longer just commercial machines violating a civil copyright. By the stroke of Elias Sterling's pen, every single device Ethelgard possessed was officially operating on stolen, highly classified military-grade technology. Ethelgard Dynamics was soaring. The financial news networks were practically acting as their personal public relations firm. We were exactly 2 weeks away from the initial public offering. Julian was featured on the glossy cover of the most prominent business magazine in the country. The bold headline under his perfectly manicured portrait read, "The New Era of Error-Free Surgery." He was doing endless podcast interviews, bragging continuously about his visionary leadership and how his revolutionary technology was going to completely disrupt a multi-billion-dollar healthcare market. The internal corporate valuation was skyrocketing. The board of directors was already picking out the custom colors for their brand new luxury yachts. It was a masterclass in painting a picture of absolute, unassailable success. But a towering skyscraper built on a rotten foundation always looks the most majestic right before it collapses into dust. The very first crack in their beautiful glass castle did not happen in the corporate boardroom. It happened in a sterile, freezing server room at a major partner hospital located in upstate New York. A senior information technology administrator was running a routine security software update on the hospital network, ensuring that their trial surgical robot was fully patched before a highly anticipated scheduled demonstration. During the diagnostic boot sequence, the system suddenly halted. a bright red warning banner flashed across the administrator screen, indicating a critical third-party firmware validation error. When the administrator dug deep into the system logs to find the exact source of the conflict, a hidden string of code illuminated his dark monitor. It was a digital watermark I had deeply embedded into the very bottom of the architecture. The text read, plainly and immutably, owned by Obsidian Nexus Limited Liability Company, exclusively licensed to Vanguard Sentinel. Confused and slightly alarmed, the hospital administrator immediately submitted an automated bug report directly to the Ethelgard Technical Support Division. That single bug report was the spark that ignited a catastrophic, invisible fire. Within hours, terrified whispers began to slither through the cubicles of the Ethelgard Engineering Department. Marcus, the shadow director who had officially replaced me, completely ignored the ticket because he simply did not possess the technical literacy to understand what the error actually meant. However, a highly paranoid junior programmer, someone who had actually worked under my direct supervision and knew exactly how meticulously I coded, secretly ran a comprehensive internal copyright scanning software on the entire repository. He sat completely alone in his cubicle, sweating profusely as he watched the progress bar crawl slowly across his screen. When the final diagnostic report compiled, the blood completely drained from his face. The scan illuminated 80% of the core operating system in bright crimson, flagging it as externally owned intellectual property. The entire feedback loop, the delicate motion stabilization, the neural translation matrix, absolutely none of it belonged to the company. They were essentially driving a stolen race car and loudly pretending they had built the engine from scratch. Panic is highly contagious, and in the ruthless corporate world, fatal secrets never stay hidden for long. The rumor quickly leaked from the engineering floor directly up to the executive legal department. The chief corporate counsel for Ethelgard was a ruthless, highly paid veteran of Silicon Valley litigation. When he heard the quiet whispers about a third-party military copyright flag, he immediately ordered his team to pull my original employment file from the Human Resources Archive. He sat in his corner office, frantically flipping through the pages of the cheap, boilerplate contract they had carelessly forced me to sign all those years ago. His eyes darted back and forth, desperately searching for the prior invention assignment clause. He read the document 3 times. He flipped it over, checking the blank back of the pages. Nothing. A cold, nauseating sweat broke out across his forehead. He suddenly realized the colossal, multi-billion-dollar legal blunder his entire department had made. They had aggressively fired the sole creator, alienated her completely, and left the most valuable intellectual property in the building totally unsecured. The chief counsel did not even bother knocking. He stormed directly into Julian's lavish glass-walled office, violently throwing the thick stack of personnel files and the catastrophic copyright scan report directly onto the center of the immaculate desk. Julian was in the middle of practicing his keynote speech for the initial public offering in a full-length mirror. He spun around, visibly annoyed by the sudden, disrespectful intrusion, but the lawyer did not give him a single chance to speak. "We own nothing, Julian," the lawyer stated, his voice trembling violently with a potent mixture of raw fury and pure terror. "Do you hear me? We own absolutely nothing core to the product we are selling. The feedback protocol fundamentally belongs to an external shell corporation, and our provisional usage rights expired a quarter of a year ago. Every single machine sitting in every single hospital right now is an illegal, copyright-infringing device." Julian stared blankly at the documents, his artificial tan suddenly looking sickly and pale. The reality of the situation crashed down on him like a physical blow. His perfect billion-dollar narrative was rapidly dissolving into thin air right before his eyes. But arrogant narcissists rarely accept defeat gracefully. Instead of facing the grim reality, Julian spiraled into pure delusional panic. He grabbed his phone and demanded that Marcus and the entire engineering team report to the main conference room immediately. Once they were assembled, Julian slammed his fist violently on the table. He blindly ordered the terrified engineers to completely rewrite the entire haptic feedback algorithm from scratch. He demanded a brand new, fully functional, legally clean operating system in exactly 72 hours. The engineers stared at him as if he had completely lost his mind. He was demanding they recreate 3 agonizing years of pioneering mathematical architecture in less than a week. It was a profoundly ridiculous and mathematically impossible demand, especially for a critical medical system that required absolute, flawless precision to prevent killing patients on the operating table. The magnificent empire was quietly cracking from the inside out, and the pristine white walls were finally starting to bleed. While the executive floor of Ethelgard Dynamics was descending into a spectacular, sweat-soaked nightmare, I was exactly 250 miles away, enjoying a remarkably peaceful morning. I had rented a secluded, timber-framed cabin nestled deep within the snow-capped peaks of the Cascade Mountains. The air up there was crisp and entirely free of the toxic scent of corporate desperation. I sat on the wooden deck, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sipping a steaming mug of dark roast coffee. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, my encrypted laptop sat on a rustic oak table, quietly displaying the real-time chatter of underground financial forums and secure technology message boards. I did not need to be in the room to watch them burn. I could feel the heat of the fire from here. The fatal strike did not arrive via a polite corporate email. It arrived in the form of 3 massive, armored black utility vehicles pulling up directly to the glass facade of Ethelgard headquarters. 6 federal couriers, escorted by armed corporate security from Vanguard Sentinel, marched straight into the grand lobby. They bypassed the terrified receptionist and delivered a highly classified, heavily sealed legal package directly to the chief legal counsel. It was not a standard lawsuit. It was a brutal, 72-page cease and desist order sanctioned by the military-industrial complex. The document explicitly demanded an immediate global recall of every single robotic arm currently in the market. It clearly stated that Ethelgard was illegally distributing highly classified defense technology and gave them exactly 48 hours to completely dismantle their commercial operations or face direct federal seizure. You cannot hide a federal legal strike of that magnitude, no matter how many public relations experts you have on your payroll. The massive institutional investors, the ruthless sharks of Wall Street, who had committed hundreds of millions of dollars to the upcoming initial public offering, instantly smelled the metallic tang of blood in the water. Rumors began bleeding out to the press. By noon, a prominent and notoriously vicious technology blog published a blistering, anonymous exposé. The headline practically screamed across the internet, accusing Ethelgard of fundamentally falsifying their intellectual property records to deceive the Food and Drug Administration. The article detailed how the entire billion-dollar valuation was resting on a stolen, unlicensed algorithm. In a matter of hours, the pre-market valuation plummeted by a staggering 40%. The golden goose was not just dying, it was being publicly slaughtered. At exactly midnight, the Ethelgard Board of Directors convened an emergency, off-the-books meeting in their penthouse conference room. The atmosphere inside that room was absolutely toxic, thick with pure terror and unadulterated rage. These were incredibly wealthy, deeply arrogant individuals who were entirely unaccustomed to losing control. Stripped of their polished manners, they immediately turned into a pack of starving wolves and turned their fangs directly on Julian. The board members screamed at him, violently slamming their expensive leather binders against the mahogany table. They viciously mocked his designer clothes and his hollow motivational buzzwords. They demanded to know how he could be so profoundly stupid as to openly humiliate and terminate the only human being on the planet who actually held the functional key to their entire empire. Julian shrank back into his plush leather chair, his face slick with a cold, pale sweat, stammering out pathetic, incoherent excuses that absolutely no one was listening to. The terrifying reality of their situation finally crushed the ego of the chairman of the board. He was a billionaire who usually communicated exclusively through a terrifying army of corporate lawyers, but in the agonizing, desperate hours of the early morning, his pride completely evaporated. He realized that the only way to save his sinking ship from utter annihilation was to beg. My personal cell phone buzzed softly against the wooden deck railing. I glanced at the screen. The caller identification displayed an unknown Seattle number, but I knew exactly who it was. I let it ring 4 times, letting the tension stretch until it was almost unbearable. Before calmly pressing the green accept button, I brought the phone to my ear but did not speak a single word. "Haley, please, do not hang up," the chairman pleaded. His voice was completely stripped of its usual booming authority. It sounded incredibly frail, frantic, and pathetic. "We understand that a massive, catastrophic oversight has occurred. Julian acted completely on his own accord. We are officially terminating his employment first thing in the morning. We want to make this right. We are prepared to offer you $20 million in liquid cash, wired directly to your account by noon today, along with a newly minted 20% equity stake in the company, if you will just agree to legally reassign the patent rights back to us." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the beautiful snow-covered pine trees. I looked at the digital clock on my screen. I let him ramble. I let him pour out every single desperate promise, every hollow apology, and every panicked negotiation tactic. He frantically increased the offer to $30 million, then $40 million, practically hyperventilating into the receiver as he begged me to save his legacy. I listened to his misery in total, absolute silence for exactly 3 minutes. I wanted to memorize the exact sound of a billionaire completely breaking down. When he finally ran out of breath and the line fell into a heavy, agonizing silence, I took a slow, calm sip of my coffee. "You are speaking to the wrong person," I replied, my voice completely flat, devoid of any anger or sympathy. "Call the Department of Defense." I pressed the red button, ending the call immediately. I powered off the phone, dropped it onto the table, and closed my eyes, listening only to the gentle mountain wind. The noose was finally tied, and I had just kicked the chair away. Despite the catastrophic federal warning delivered just 48 hours prior, Ethelgard Dynamics simply could not afford to cancel their grand initial public offering gala and the accompanying live-streamed surgical demonstration. To cancel the highly publicized event would have been an immediate, fatal admission of guilt to their ravenous investors. They were backed into a suffocating corner, and so the board of directors made one final, desperate gamble. They decided to push forward with the show, praying they could somehow secure the venture capital funds before the federal hammer actually fell. The demonstration was staged in a massive, custom-built amphitheater designed to replicate a state-of-the-art operating room. The blinding white surgical lights illuminated a hyper-realistic silicone simulation model of a human brain resting on a stainless steel table. The entire event was being broadcasted live across every major financial news network. Over 3 million concurrent viewers, including the most ruthless hedge fund managers on Wall Street, were watching the feed intently. Julian Vance stepped out from behind the velvet curtains and walked to the center of the stage. He was wearing his signature black designer turtleneck, but the effortless, arrogant charm he usually projected had completely vanished. Under the intense glare of the studio lights, his face looked deeply gaunt and coated in a thick, shining layer of nervous sweat. The expensive fabric of his shirt clung to his back, soaked through with pure terror. When he raised his hand to hold the microphone, his fingers were trembling so violently that he had to grip it with both hands just to keep it steady. He forced a stiff, unnatural smile toward the primary camera lens. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we do not just step into the future of medicine, we completely redefine it," Julian announced, his voice cracking noticeably over the high-fidelity audio system. He desperately tried to maintain the illusion, gesturing weakly toward the towering mechanical arm. "Our core operating system is about to perform an autonomous micro-incision with a margin of error of exactly 0%. Let us begin." The robotic arm hummed to life. The titanium joints rotated smoothly, lowering the microscopic surgical blade toward the silicone simulation model. It was exactly 2 inches away from the artificial tissue. Then, the heavy oak double doors at the absolute rear of the amphitheater did not just open, they were violently thrown apart. The deafening crash of the doors slamming against the walls echoed like a bomb blast through the auditorium and across the live broadcast feed. The murmurs of the audience were instantly silenced. The camera operators instinctively whipped their heavy lenses away from the stage and pointed them down the center aisle. Marching in absolute, terrifying unison was a column of 12 individuals wearing dark tactical windbreakers with bold yellow letters printed across their backs. They were elite federal agents from the United States Department of Commerce and senior investigators from the Food and Drug Administration. Walking calmly directly behind them, flanked by a massive legal team, was Elias Sterling of Vanguard Sentinel. A senior federal agent, a tall man with a stern, uncompromising face, did not wait to reach the stage. He raised a heavy black megaphone to his mouth, the blaring siren function slicing through the ambient noise of the room. Julian Vance and the executive board of Ethelgard Dynamics. The agent's voice boomed, completely overpowering the theater sound system. By the authority of the United States federal government, you are ordered to immediately halt this demonstration and step away from the machinery. Julian froze entirely, his wide, bloodshot eyes staring blindly into the blinding stage lights. He looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. The lead agent marched directly up the carpeted stairs and onto the main stage, holding up a thick stack of documents secured in a blue legal binder. He turned to face the audience and the glowing red lights of the broadcast cameras. "We are executing a federal injunction and immediate seizure order," the agent declared loudly. "The robotic equipment displayed on this stage and every active unit currently deployed in the field is operating on highly classified, stolen proprietary architecture. This company is in severe violation of the Defense Technology Protection Act. Every asset in this building is officially seized by the federal government." Complete, utter bedlam erupted inside the theater. Hundreds of investors and reporters leaped out of their seats, shouting in confusion and pure panic. The production crew in the control booth frantically scrambled to cut the live feed, but they were too paralyzed by shock to act quickly enough. Millions of viewers across the globe watched in stunning high definition as the federal agents swarmed the surgical table, slapping heavy red tamper evidence seals across the joints of the billion-dollar robotic arm. The live feed finally cut to a harsh, buzzing black screen, but the profound damage had already been permanently etched into the history of Wall Street. In the front row of the auditorium, the billionaire chairman of the board and his fellow directors sat entirely frozen in their plush chairs. They did not speak. They did not move. They simply stared forward with hollow, dead eyes as their smartphones began vibrating continuously with emergency alerts. In the span of exactly 60 seconds, the stock exchange had indefinitely halted all trading of Ethelgard shares. The multi-billion-dollar valuation had violently evaporated into thin air. Their fortunes, their reputations, and their legacies were instantly burned to ash. Up on the stage, Julian finally broke. His knees gave out beneath him, and he collapsed heavily against the transparent acrylic podium, gasping for air as if he were drowning. He openly sobbed, his manicured hands clutching his chest. A federal agent stepped forward, grabbed Julian by his expensive shoulder, and roughly pulled his arms behind his back. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed sharply around him. He was loudly read his rights and placed under formal arrest for committing massive wire fraud and deliberately defrauding global investors. Let us change the scenery. 2,000 miles away from the smoking crater of Ethelgard Dynamics, I was sitting comfortably in an expansive, breathtaking corner office on the 60th floor of the Vanguard Sentinel headquarters in downtown Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning, uninterrupted view of the city skyline. I was resting in a custom-made Italian leather chair, running my fingers over the engraved brass nameplate sitting on my massive mahogany desk. It read, Haley James, Supreme Technology Advisor. I took a slow, refreshing sip of sparkling water from a crystal glass. On the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the far wall, I was watching the chaotic, looping news footage of Julian being shoved into the back of a dark federal vehicle. His face hidden awkwardly beneath his jacket, The anchor on the screen was breathlessly reporting the complete dissolution of the medical tech startup. I set my glass down and offered a soft, chillingly calm smirk. I stood up and walked over to the adjacent wall. Hanging there, perfectly illuminated by a small gallery light, was a heavy platinum frame protecting a single, slightly dusty manila folder behind museum-grade ultraviolet glass. It was the original incorporation document for Obsidian Nexus Limited Liability Company. I did not just survive their brutal betrayal. I did not just execute a flawless revenge against the arrogant men who tried to throw me out like garbage. I completely dismantled their universe and rebuilt it entirely in my own image. I redefined the absolute rules of the game. I proved to the entire industry that the loud, charismatic executives in the designer suits are nothing but fragile actors on a temporary stage. The person who truly holds the power, the person who dictates the life and death of the entire empire, is always the silent, invisible engineer standing in the back of the room, holding the only key to the locks they do not even know exist. Thank you so much to everyone tuning in and listening to this incredible journey. We truly appreciate your time and your support. Please let us know in the comments exactly where in the world you are listening from today. If you found today's story thrilling and satisfying, please help us keep this community alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. You will gain immediate access to the absolute best, most intense true stories with exclusive details that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and stay tuned for the next brilliant act of revenge.